Thanks for tuning in to our October series, Fixer Upper. If you have been blessed by our online resources, remember that you can continue to spread the message of grace by investing in our online ministry. Visit our website at crossroadscn.com and select the online giving tab, or you can download our app and give safely and securely. Through today's message, we believe you will experience the presence, the power, and the plan of God for your life.
I get an opportunity today that I don't get very often. I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute, but we are right in the middle of a new series that we started last week called Fixer Upper, and last week we dealt with the inspection, and we talked about, hey, it first of all starts with us and doing the inspection, and we said this, we have to be willing to do a walkthrough in our life, and so that's the first step, and then the second thing that we said is that we need to be open to do a talk through, that once we've identified some things, we got to be willing to go there to talk about it. And so last week we showed this great video about, hey, we need to realize we all have a nail in our head, and so if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, you need to watch the message online this week. I want to encourage you guys to do that because, hey, we don't identify the issues that we have in ourselves, so we got to be open to talk about it and let someone else point those things out. And then finally, we have to commit to the follow-through, that we're not just going to start something, but we're going to finish something. And so, and why are we talking about relationships? Why? Because this is, and I shared it with you last week, the most important thing that we have in our relations is our relationships. Our relationship with God and our relationship with one another. And we said this, if we have good, healthy relationships, that's what's going to make us happier and healthier in life. And it's proven, not just in God's Word, but it's proven throughout society, in studies and all kinds of things going on that. But today, we're going to go a little different direction. And I have the privilege of being able to speak with my favorite person in the world, who I am in the most deep relationship with on this planet, my beautiful wife, who just had a birthday this week. She turned 29 again, and so we are so... I am so thankful and grateful to be able to share God's Word with her today, and so I'm going to let her share first.
All right, well, good morning. It's great to be able to do this and to share with you all. You know, I know Chris had mentioned last week just how thankful we are for your gift to us during Pastor Appreciation Month, and so now I just have an opportunity to do that, and I wanted to just say thank you. Thank you for the monetary gift that you gave to us. We are so looking forward to a week away in Florida and being able to just rest and refuel and come back to you with new vision and an opportunity to just share with you out of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that He gave to us as we rested. So thank you for that. You know, I am thrilled to be able to share this speaking opportunity with Chris because I have a deep amount of respect for him over the last, how many years have we been married now? Okay, see, this is me. This is me, yeah. Chris is the one that always remembers the dates. I'm the one who fails to remember dates. Isn't it kind of like a role reversal here in relationship? Yeah, it is. And I will admit that I am the one who fails to remember, but 22? Yeah, very nice. Okay. So, anyway, for 22 years now, Chris and I have had a few disagreements. Should we say discussions?
No, never.
And over the last 22 years, I have watched him receive instruction and apply my wisdom in his life and walk that out in a very powerful way when it comes to communication. And so I just have to say that this conversation is coming to you with great respect for this man, because he not only listens to what I have to say, but he really does a good job at applying most of what I say. So it's good. We'll talk more about that too.
We will say most. That's accurate. So, but we do. Hey, we want to kind of jump right into today because I know just our time here. One of the things that our title for today is Blueprint, and as we think about the byline in this message, the best laid plans start with a firm foundation. You know, you think about if we were building a home, you know, what would be the first step that we would do? Would we, go to Home Depot or go to Menards and order all of the materials and have them delivered to our house and just start, get some people together and just start building a house? Well, no, we wouldn't do that unless we want to live in a doghouse, all right? We wouldn't do that. We would start out with a plan, and I know there's some very talented, contractors in here and builders that they could build a house without, sitting down and looking at a plan because they're very talented in those areas. But you know what? They wouldn't do that if they were building a house with someone without having a plan, because we need to have a plan as to, hey, what kind of house do we need for our family? Will it meet all of our needs? Are we going to be able to afford this house that we're going to build and create? And so we got to have a blueprint. We have to have a plan. Now, you think just about this, if we decided to go ahead and build a home without that blueprint and without that plan, we just decided to do it. Do you think we would have some pitfalls? Do you think we would have some issues that are going to be created because we didn't start out with a blueprint and a plan? Well, we can guarantee it. There's going to be issues. There's going to be problems with that home if we started out that way. And so today, we want to talk about relationships because, we can be in relationships, but a lot of times we don't spend a lot of time working on those relationships and making them better and taking them further. And I can tell you over 22 years, we've had a lot of just working on our relationship to make it better, to make it stronger, to make it where God would direct us and guide us to. And so the first thing that we need to understand is this: in any relationship, if it's going to succeed, if it's going to move forward, and it's going to resolve issues, we have to start with an architect. We have to start with God designing and creating and helping us facilitate a plan. So the first point of this, as you're taking notes, is connect with the architect. You need to bring God into the equation when it comes to relationship. Your very first relationship has to start with your relationship with God. You need to seek Him. You need to talk with Him, to read His Word, to get to know what He has to say about relationships. And I want us to understand this, that the architect of any building project is the designer. And God is the designer of our lives. He is your architect. He's my architect. He knows us better than we know ourselves, what's going on in our life. But not only that, the people that we're in relationship with, whether it be in marriage, whether it be in a dating relationship, whether it be a friendship or a relationship with a sibling or parents or whoever it may be, that God knows that other person better than you could ever know them and know where they're coming from. And He can provide insight into that relationship if we will spend time connecting with them. Now, the second thing I want us to understand along with that is God is the designer, but you and I are the builder when it comes to our life and what we have. And I want you to think about that. God doesn't dictate our life to us. He gives us a free will to choose how we want to live our life, how we want to go about life. And so a lot of times what happens is a lot of people will not even connect with the designer. They won't collaborate with the designer. And I would not recommend that whatsoever, okay? I would not recommend it. We need to collaborate with God as the designer. He knows what's best. He knows what we need. He is able to prevent us from making some major relationship missteps when it comes to that. And so let me just kind of say this. Right now, as you are here in God's house, in the church, you are collaborating with God right now. You're bringing God into the equation and saying, God, I need some wisdom. I need some insight for life. I need some understanding. And so let me just say, don't forsake this assembling of ourselves, as God's Word says. You need to be in God's house on a weekly basis, but it's not just being in God's house. We've got to connect with God throughout the course of the week, connecting to our architect. You know what? Jesus said this about building. He said this in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 and 27. It's up through the 27. It's on the screen. It says, anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is like a wise person, is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it's built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and all the winds beat against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Jesus makes it clear. If we are going to be a wise builder, we have to involve Him in the process, His Word, His teaching. If we want to be a foolish builder, where we are going to have rains and things come in to destroy our relationships, then we don't involve Him in the equation. And so we have to involve Him. Another thing that's important to point out is when it comes to architects is that they know the building codes better than anyone else. Now, a builder, because they're building, they get to know building codes, they get to understand them, But by law, an architect has to be up on all of the building codes to be able to design that. And the point that I want to make with that is this, is God knows all of the codes when it comes to relationships and making things work and making life work. And so we have to be connected, because what happens is God gives us a blueprint for life, and the blueprint defines the boundary lines, where we're supposed to be, and staying inside of those boundary lines that God has created, the blueprint for our lives will help us to be successful and grow deeper in our relationship with one another and our relationship with God. So we need to connect with the architect. Nicki's going to talk about just some time sharing about how we can feel disconnected from the architect and what happens there.
Yeah, I think this is a really common feeling or thought that we have. I don't think that we would be growing in our relationship with God if we didn't experience moments of conflict with Him. We've heard the term before that conflict breeds intimacy. And there are times where God allows conflict, or He allows some distance in our relationship with Him, so we can learn how to navigate through that and ultimately be drawn closer to Him in greater intimacy. When we're in conflict, there are times, though, our preconceived ideas about God isolate us from Him. So, lies begin to settle into the crevices of our mind, and we think thoughts such as, God, you don't get this about me. You don't understand where I'm coming from. You've never been through this particular situation in this way. And so, God, you just don't get this. You're too holy. You're too perfect. We feel misunderstood and judged by God even before we ask Him what He thinks or how He thinks about a situation. So we're going to take a look at a specific person in the Bible is in how they related to God, how God's character was revealed to that person in the midst of conflict. So we're going to look at David, the king of Israel, and we're going to look at how he gravely failed in his relationship with another person, with several individuals, and how that impacted his relationship with God. In 2 Samuel 11, David was at home from war. Many of you are very, very familiar with this story. So just to recap, he was home from war. He had already gone to bed, but he couldn't sleep. So he got up, he went out onto the balcony of his palace, and he began to look out over his kingdom. He saw a beautiful woman, and she was bathing on the rooftop, and he inquired about her. He brought her up to his room, he slept with her, and then found out later that she was pregnant. He was caught and desperately tried to cover it up by bringing her husband home from the battle lines, allowing him opportunity to sleep with his wife, and that way it would look as though he was the one who got her pregnant. Well, when that plan miserably failed, David then took it upon himself to have Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, killed on the front lines of battle. So here is David in this absolute scandal, laziness, adultery, scheming, and murder. And knowing what I know about God, knowing His character, knowing His heart, I know that God hates sin, and He has a really hard time being in the midst of it. As a matter of fact, the Bible says very clearly that God can't be in the midst of sin. It's just not a part of who He is. And so, knowing this about God, when we sin, it separates us from Him. This is conflict. This is the tension that David experienced with God. And it's building. It's like one particular act after another. And David just keeps compounding this sin in his life. And the distance from God just begins to get greater and greater and greater. And I don't think there's any one of us in this room that probably can't identify with that in some way or another. I myself have understood what it's like to lie, to try to cover up that lie. And then I have to lie again to try to cover up that lie. And then you have to lie and you have to do something else to try to cover that up. And then you have to have a really great memory, which is something I don't have. And so it all ends up just coming all to the surface, and then God just ends up feeling that much more distant and further away from my life. And so here David is in that particular situation. So the separation is beyond imaginable, and we clearly see what David has done. It's obvious what's in David's heart. Now, let's see what's in God's. So in 2 Samuel chapter 12, God interrupts the prophet Nathan out of his daily routine and gives him a very specific analogy to share with David. in hopes that David will recognize his sin and run to God for forgiveness. So here's a couple little bullet points that we need to take note of when it comes to how God interrupted Nathan and brought him into David's life. God's response, first of all, was to pursue David out of his deep love for him. God passionately loves us. And in the midst of our sin, God will interrupt the life of another individual to come to us and tell us how we need to get right with him. God's heart, second of all, of love, designed a story purposed to jolt David into reality about his serious conflict. He created a story, birthed it into the heart and mind of Nathan, and allowed Nathan to come into David's life and share this story with him. It was a powerful analogy that got David's attention. Thirdly, when David recognized his sin, his conflict with God, he agreed with God and he repented. Fourth, God's response to David was absolutely loving and forgiving. His act of pursuing and assigning someone else to intervene was God's passionate display to restore relationship when it was obviously David who had done the offending. Isn't that interesting? When we offend someone else, man, we hold our ground, don't we? We like drive a stake in the ground and we are proud and we're arrogant and there is no way we're going to go to that person and make right the offense that we committed. But that's so unlike God and so unlike his character. And he did whatever it took to get David to a place of understanding that he had offended him, but he was lovingly wanting and desiring a relationship restored with him. So the next right step after this, after we realize how God has pursued us in the midst of our sin and how we have caused this great grave of separation between us and God, we have to realize God loves us. He's pursuing us. He desires a relationship with us. And so our next right step in all of that is to reconnect with the architect. I think God has proven time and time again, and specifically through the life of David, that there is no damage that is too deep that God is not willing to restore and that God is not willing to forgive. So Chris is going to take us on here to the next commitment that we make.
So connecting with the architect, the second thing that we need to do is commit to the cost. You know, in Luke chapter 14, verse 28, it says this. It says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't he first sit down and estimate the cost to see if we have enough money to complete it? You know, at some point when planning or building a home, you have to decide, are we committed to the cost? Hey, do we think we can afford this? Can we make the payments on here? At some point we need to decide, hey, we're committed to this. You know what? In every relationship, I want you to understand this when it comes to relationship. At some point, you made a commitment to that relationship. If you're in a marriage, you made a commitment to that relationship. If you're in a dating relationship, hey, you committed to go out with them again and maybe again and again. You committed to that. You made a commitment when it came to a friendship to continue in that relationship there. You made a commitment to still continue to be in contact, hey, with my parents, or continue to be in contact with my siblings and other people. You made a commitment to that. Now, here's the issue when it comes to commitment. When trouble comes, when things get messy, when it gets hard, is that we oftentimes can be challenged to continue to make that commitment to that relationship. Are we committed to it? And we have to make a decision to look past the craziness that might be going on right now. Look past the messiness of this relationship and say, you know what? I know we got some fixing up to do when it comes to this relationship, but I'm committed to this relationship. I'm committed to what needs to happen. I want to see good things happen here, and I believe as we connect to the architect that some good things can happen as we commit to the cost. And so the one thing that I want you guys to recognize when it comes to understanding relationships that you're in, there's a key element that we need to understand as Christ followers when it comes to this. We need to recognize who the enemy is when it comes into our relationship. It's not your child. It's not your father. It's not your mother. It's not your spouse. It's not your friend. It's not your brother. It's not your sister. They are not your enemy, but you have an enemy that will seek to steal, kill, and destroy, and he will work his way into the best relationships. He will work his way in. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 speaks to this. It says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. When we recognize who the enemy is as Christ followers, what it helps us to do, it helps us to understand, hey, I want to make a commitment to this relationship even more because I know the enemy's trying to work it in. He's trying to destroy. And it causes me, when I recognize, even when Nicki and I are having a discussion, that I realize the enemy would try to work his way in here. And it's not me and her, right now, that the enemy would try to work his way and divide us, to bring disunity when it comes to our relationship. In the same way with any relationship that we're in, the enemy will try to work his way to get us off track. Nicki talked about David a few moments. In one part of the Bible, it says that David was a man after God's own heart. And you think about that. He was a man that was of God's own heart, but David got off track in his life. Nicki pointed this out. He got off track when it came to his life. We all can get off track. And it cost him. It cost him relationally. It cost him in his relationship with God. But God forgave him. And He didn't define who David was from that point forward. God released him. He forgave him from that. The enemy wants to work his way in. Back in our home in Texas, Nicki and I came home one day, and I told you last week, this was a new house. I mean, we weren't 3 years into this house, and we came in one of our bedrooms, there was a termite swarm. They had actually come through the drywall, and the wall was covered, the floor was covered, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here? Because I'm thinking termites, they need to be in older houses. They shouldn't be in the new house like this. Like, what are they doing here? And so, we're freaking out a little bit, because there's termites. Now, do you expose that we just shut the door and says, we'll just let whatever happens there, deal with it? When it comes to that, absolutely not. We're on the phone with the exterminator. We've got termites in our home. We need you to come out. We need you to help us here with this. But you know what? A lot of times when it deals with a relationship, if we have an infestation and the enemy comes against it, a lot of times what will happen is sometimes we shut the door to it. And we say, hey, no, that'll take care of itself. And we don't talk about the issues. We don't deal with the issues. Or, hey, we're just going to sweep this under the rug. Or if I bring it up, it's just going to make it even more intense and out of control. Well, hey, in the same way, if we've got termites in our house, we're not going to just shut the door to it. We're going to take care of it. We squash bugs at our house. That's what we do, all right? We take care of them. We bring people in to squash bugs at our house. Whatever needs to happen, except for my daughter. I'm still working on her. She's still a little fearful. I have to go squash her bugs for her sometimes. But you think about this. Why did I tell this story? Because we have an adversary that tries to come against us like a swarm of termites that will work into our relationship. And we can't just ignore it. We got to commit to the cost. We got to say, hey, whatever it takes, we're going to do this. I can tell you, I didn't like paying that money to that exterminator. It wasn't something I was planning on. But you know what? I wasn't going to allow that to continue in our house. We were going to get rid of it. In the same way, when it comes to your relationships are the most invaluable things in your life, you need to commit to the cost. What do we need to do to get us to a new place? Do we need to seek out counsel? Do we need to go to a conference? Do we need to seek out different things when it comes to our relationship? And that's different relationships, there's different commitments to it. Whatever it may be, but we need to be willing to commit to the cost. Now here's the thing. Do we fear the enemy when he comes against us? When he comes in like a flood, like a termite infestation into our house? Do we fear that? Do we fear that when he puts an assault on a relationship? Why? Because he is big and bad, and he's maybe, more than we are. We can't handle him in ourselves. But let me just kind of say what happens and what Jesus did on the cross when it comes to us fighting our enemy. Now, suppose with me that somebody held me at gunpoint. Now, a guy comes up to me, has a gun on me, and he says, I want you to sit down. What do you think? Do you think I'm going to sit down? Yes, I am. I'm going to sit down, all right? He's got a gun, all right? And he's holding at me. I'm going to sit down, all right? I'm going to sit down. The second thing is if he asks me to give me, or to give to him my wallet, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to give him my wallet. There's not that much in there anyway. It's not a big deal. It's like, here you go, sir. You might can get a Happy Meal now, that's it. So that would be my response. Now, the equation turns if I know that there are no bullets in that gun. If there's no bullets in that gun, and this chump's holding a gun on me, it might be a citizen's arrest. I might take him down at that point, because I know there's no bullets in the gun. And I want you to understand this. What Jesus did on the cross is he took the bullets out of the gun. He took the bullets out of the gun. Satan might come against you and he might try to bring an infestation into your relationship, but the bullets are removed from the gun because Jesus Christ defeated him on the cross once and for all. And we need to understand that. We don't have to run, we don't have to fear, but to understand, not sweeping it under the rug, but God, you are going to help us work through this relational conflict. Don't give up on the relationship. There is hope. Don't allow a situation to, say, hey, we can't work this out, but allow God to work through you. You know, a lot of times what people do is when we have relational strife is sometimes what will happen is we see this, people start thinking the grass is greener over there relationally. You know, if I move from this relationship to this relationship, it's going to be so much better. The grass is greener over here on that. You know, I love what Ted Cunningham does, and this is what will happen in relationships too. Someone might consider having an affair or something going on there because they think the grass is greener over here, relational. I love what he put. He said it this way. He says, where the grass is greener, there's always a septic field. So you may think that the grass is greener over there, but you're going to step in something, all right?
That's right.
You understand what I'm saying there? Is that we need to understand is don't give up on our relationships. Fight through. Use the weapons the architect has given us. Now let me just say something clear here, and I just want to make sure just to give a disclaimer when it talks about relationship. I'm not talking about staying in an abusive relationship with someone. I believe that there needs to be some clear boundaries that need to be set when it comes to a relationship like that, when abuse is happening. And it's those boundaries, when they're crossed over, that you need to seek help and you need to seek counsel in that, and you need to remove yourself from that situation. So let me just kind of say that. Commit to the relationship, but in those situations, let me just give that disclaimer there.
Okay, so just a really quick recap. First of all, it's important to connect with the architect. Second of all, we commit to the cost. And then next, I'm going to talk about committing to invest. Commit to invest. You know, it's important that we be proactive in our relationships. Offense is inevitable, therefore conflict is guaranteed. We're going to have offense, we're going to have conflict, no matter if it's in your marriage or if it's in a friendship or if it's in a parent-child relationship or a sibling, we're always going to have an offense, and so therefore conflict is going to happen. To be proactive, this signifies that we've anticipated and prepared ahead of time, where reactive displays unpreparedness and surprise. So in relationships, instead of being reactive in those relationships, we need to be proactive. We need to understand that, you know what, offense is inevitable, like I just mentioned. We're going to have conflict, and so let's be proactive. How can we preempt an argument or a conflict or a situation from escalating way out of control? So how does that happen? Well, let me ask you this. If a vase is teetering on the edge of a countertop, are you going to catch it before the vase falls off the table or off the counter? Or are you going to wait and watch it fall off the counter, hit the ground, smash into a million pieces, and then pick it up? Well, if we can, if we're there and we're available, we're going to catch that vase before it falls off the table, because that vase is valuable. That vase is important. That vase is significant. And so we're going to catch it. And so let me just ask you this morning, are you a vase catcher? Or are you just going to wait and watch the vase fall on the ground? Well, in relationships, we need to ask ourselves, are we going to be proactive and catch the vase before it falls off the table? Or are we going to wait and watch it fall to pieces and almost be irreparable at the end? And so honestly, I think most of us in this room would say, I'd like to be preemptive, proactive, and I want to catch the vase before it hits the ground. And so being proactive means that you communicate. It means that you commit to invest in communication, and you communicate often. Now, I understand that sometimes communication can be a dirty word in your home. It can be a dirty word in your vocabulary. Communication is tough. It's hard. It's messy. It's ugly. And sometimes communication just almost feels impossible. However, if you talk ahead of time, if you learn to be proactive ahead of time, this communication can oftentimes save that vase from falling off the edge of the table. Chris and I have incorporated a few regular proactive habits into our marriage that indicate our investment in each other. So regardless if you're married, you're dating, or you're single or engaged, these are some necessary principles to incorporate in all of your meaningful relationships. So first of all, we incorporate daily couch time. This is our daily dose of each other. This is where, when Chris gets home from the end of his workday, we will just take some time, and oftentimes it doesn't necessarily happen on the couch, but this is something that we call it. So oftentimes I will be making dinner in the kitchen while Chris comes in, and it will be counter time. It's like our daily counter time. And so the kids, they know as soon as Dad gets in, they greet him, they say hi to him, and they leave the room. They go off to their room and they do whatever it is that they need to do. They finish up homework. And Chris and I spend some time gathered around the counter, and we talk about our day. We hit the high points. We don't go into a lot of details about specific things, but we hit the high points. And this is time where, I'll share with Chris just kind of a basic bullet point rundown of what happened in the day. How was pickup? When I picked the kids up from school, what were some things that were going on in their life? How was the day for them? And that way he's kind of got a bird's eye view of what's going on in our home, what kind of happened in my day, and then he'll tell me his high points, his low points, and we'll just quickly run through the bullet point of those, and then we'll move on. Our kids will come back into the room and we'll move on with dinner or whatever else that we're doing. But usually we spend about 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most doing this. But this is an opportunity for us to just have this connect time with one another. And I guarantee you there are days where either I will come home or Chris will come home, and he just needs some downtime. He doesn't necessarily, he needs a minute to just collect himself, or I need a minute to collect myself. And so he'll go to the room, he'll go to the office, I will do the same, and we'll just take a few minutes, but we always come back and we have counter time or couch time with each other just so we can connect about the day before we move on with whatever else it is that we're having. Second of all, we do weekly withdrawal. This is our date night. This is our fun time together. This time is not to resolve our issues. It is not to necessarily talk about our weekly plans or what's coming up on the agenda. This is time to enjoy each other, just to chill, to laugh, to hang out, to do fun stuff together. We try to keep the heavy subjects at bay during this time. We really try to eliminate talking about work, about church. We try to eliminate talking about our kids if possible. And so this is a time where it's just us. This is our weekly withdrawal. This is something we look forward to. Honestly, it's like the highlight of our week next to our Sabbath day. So weekly withdrawal. And then third is our annual getaway, or our annual abandon, where we just annually abandon everything else on our schedules, everything else on our calendars, and we have a week where we get together with each other. And that's what we're doing with your pastor appreciation gift. We are taking it to get away and just to spend the week talking, laughing, having fun, doing things that we enjoy, eating at a few restaurants that maybe we don't get a chance to eat at. So this is something that's special for us. We have committed to invest. This is our proactive plan. And then next, we commit to resolve conflict. So we commit to invest, and then we commit to resolve conflict. In a minute, we're going to talk about how we resolve conflict. We're going to give you some tools as to how we do that. Now we're saying we're committed to this. We want to improve our relationships, and we tell each other that. We'll tell each other often, "Hey, I'm with you, babe. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this really difficult time. We're committed to each other." So, Chris, take from here.
So, last thing we're going to do is we're going to communicate the plan, and what we want to give you guys today is some necessary tools in dealing with conflict when it comes into relational conflict, of how to process that and how to work through some pitfalls that might happen there. But you know what? We found this product online that is going to solve all of our problems. And so we got just a little quick infomercial that we just want. You can just go out and purchase the product, and it's going to take care of everything.
Email behavior. Let it translate to understand what she means.
deserves a clap. We could get that for just $7,000. Isn't that worth the investment? Yeah.
Maybe. No.
If there was such a thing, wouldn't that be great? Man, it requires more than 50-50 in a relationship. We've all heard that at some point or another. It requires each of us giving 100. We oftentimes approach conflict with a self-focused lens. For example, Chris and I are in conflict, and I might be thinking in the back of my mind, and he's probably wishing he had his manslater out, that I made the bed this morning. I took the kids to school. I'm holding them accountable for homework and providing teachable moments after school. I'm setting up doctor's appointments and getting them there. I'm making dinner. I'm following up on kids' chores. I'm giving baths. I'm creating devotional and Bible reading habits. I'm writing love notes. I'm establishing a prayer shield around our home. I'm working 35 hours a week and running kids to soccer, piano, friends, and church. I'm tired. Well, yeah. When we approach a conflict, oftentimes we've got this long running list of all of the things that we have done. And so we're coming into our conflict with this long list of things that we have done that we wish that they had. Well, there's no way that you can approach a conflict with an appropriate tone after you've got this long running list of all the things that we've done that you wish that they had helped you with, or that you wish that they had come to the rescue in. So if we're to fully follow Jesus' model, how Christ loved the church and he laid his life down, our relationships require our very first tool, and that's unconditional humility. Tool number 1, humility. So here's what we need to do. We need to take a virtual trip through the land of humility. This is fun. Okay, so picture yourself doing this, so that way when the time comes for you to be humble, you've already been there in your head and your heart. Does that make sense? So if I'm taking a virtual trip down the path that, man, Chris didn't pick his clothes up off the floor, which he always does, so that's not really a realistic example in our home, but I don't know. What haven't you done?
I don't know.
He's a really great guy. So when it comes to exploring ways to be humble, if for some reason Chris wasn't as sensitive to me as I needed him to be, or if he responded with a hurried heart or mind about something, if I needed him to take some time or attention to hear me out about a specific subject, and I could tell that he was like way not with me. He was somewhere else. He was at the men's breakfast with the guys eating sausage and bacon. I can see it. I can see it in his mind. That's where he is. And I'm mad. I'm getting mad. Well, if I take a virtual trip and realize there's a potential of that happening, I need to immediately, proactively humble myself in that particular situation. And if I've already gone there in my head and my heart, even before the situation surfaces itself, it makes it so much easier for me to just humble myself. If Chris comes to me, if he's offended by something that I have done, I need to also go that direction in my mind and my heart as well. That there's going to be a time where, I might have felt like I was like 100% sure and absolutely right, that I was the one on the high ground about this issue, and he's the one that was way out in left field somewhere. I need to be willing to say, okay, I've got to humble myself, and I need to be willing to walk in his shoes in this situation and take it from his perspective. So putting aside my own agenda is part of this humility tool. It's not waiting for the other person to initiate when there's conflict. For several years into the beginning of our marriage, I had this expectation that it was the man who was supposed to initiate when we got into conflict. And I came to soon realize that that's not biblical. That's not God's heart for me. And so I realized that if I sense that there's conflict, that I'm walking on eggshells or he's walking on ice around me, I've got to sense that. And I need to go to him and I need to humble myself and take the initiative. Also, part of the humility tool is choosing to forgive the other person even before you communicate about it. It's a hard choice to do it. So if we haven't even discussed the issue, I have to already examine my heart and say, okay, I'm making the hard choice to forgive Chris even before he asks me to forgive him, even before he recognizes that he was an absolute failure in this situation, right? Right? So, and that's what's in our mind, right, ladies? So tool number 1, humility. Romans 12:10. I love how it states this in the New Century Version. It says, love each other like brothers and sisters. Give each other more honor than you want for yourselves. And this is something that we have to constantly practice in our marriage. I want to give Chris way more honor than I want for myself, even when it comes to conflict. I want him to feel like he has left on the high road. I don't want him to feel like he is being washed up to dry when we get done with a conversation. So, tool number 2, avoid the blame game. Right? You knew we were going to go there, so here it is. Tool number 2, avoiding the blame game. Removing you statements from the conversation. And this is how we avoid the blame game in our conversations when we're in conflict with each other. Immediately we have come to sit down and we will say to one another, you know, I felt really hurt when you did this, or you didn't do this, or you said this, or you didn't say this. I felt really hurt by that. Instead of saying, I can't believe you. You did this, you said this, you went about this the wrong way. Now, do you see the difference between how that sounds and how that feels? There's a huge difference when you say, I felt hurt. I felt disenfranchised. I felt frustrated. I felt disappointed. I mean, there's a lot of value in using I words versus you statements. So,
third tool is avoid generalities, which just kind of connects with this one. Like saying things like, you always do this, or you never do this. We need to avoid those. We need to eliminate those words from our vocabulary because they're not resolving conflict. They're just creating more conflict. And the truth is, hey, it isn't completely true. It's not true. You don't always, every minute of every second of every day, do something, all right? That doesn't happen, and so there's not truth in that, and so we need to speak truth, and we need to avoid generalities. That's a tool. The next tool is this, I'm going to kind of move through these, is determine how far back in the past you're going to go. Nicki and I have had to address this in our marriage, and we had to grow specifically in this area. We had to determine that we are going to continue to bring things up past a week in our relationship. We're going to continue to bring things up from the past. We had to grow into that we're not going to continue to go there. Bringing up the past is not addressing the immediate issue. We need to address the immediate issue, not what happened 3 weeks ago, not what happened a year ago, not what happened 3 months ago. We need to address, hey, what's hurting us now, what's creating the conflict in us right now, and address that. And a lot of times is what I've seen, especially in a marriage relationship, when it comes to this whole part of bringing up the past, a lot of times it's a deflection mechanism that we don't like what the other person is saying to us, and we don't agree with all of that, and we just don't like it, and so we deflect back on them so that it gets the attention off us. And so we have to stop going back into the past. And here's some things that's been key for us resolving just conflict in our relationship and not bringing up the past, is that we practice this, is that when I've hurt Nicki and I have said something or done something that I should not have done, and I will say these words to her, will you please forgive me for whatever it may be that I have done? Will you please forgive me? And then we practice this by going on, will you please forgive me, is the other person has to say, I forgive you. I forgive you. And so here's the point of that. By them saying those words, I forgive you, as we practice this in our relationship, they have said, I forgive you, is that means those things in the past are off limits now. Why? Because if I'm to forgive as Christ forgave us, that means I am making a choice to forgive Nicki. I'm making a choice to forgive that other person that I'm in relationship with. And it's not right for me to bring up the past because God doesn't deal with us that way. God doesn't bring up the past in our relationship. And so if I'm supposed to be Christ-like and I'm supposed to be a follower of Jesus, that means I'm not going to let that past come up, but I choose to forgive, and I chose to forgive that past.
Just a quick little commercial break for parents. This is something that we instill in our kids as well. We teach them the key of forgiveness and reconciliation and restoration in relationships. It's so vital and important that our kids learn to do this because we're growing in an impending culture right now that that values and holds on to offense. And we want to raise kids who value reconciliation and restoration versus holding on to offenses. So just my quick little parenting tip for the morning. So,
number 5 is talk immediately, as soon as possible. You know what? Don't let it go longer than 24 hours if you're in conflict with someone or in conflict with your spouse or whoever it may be. Now, you might not be able to talk while you're on the job with them, all right? But you need to talk with them as soon as possible. We have times where we're talking with people that are having different issues, and we ask the question, hey, what's your communication been like since this conflict arose? Well, I haven't talked to them in like 2 days, or I haven't talked to my spouse in a week. And I'm like, wait a minute. You have gone for this length of time without having any communication. I mean, that's like putting a pressure cooker on the stove and just letting it go on for, a full blast for hours while you run to the mall for 10 hours. What's going to happen? It's going to continue to stew, and there's not going to be good things that take place there because of that. And so we have to deal with that anger, with that frustration, with those things. Don't let it pass. Talk immediately. Deal with that in the right way. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27, it says this, in your anger do not sin, do not let the sun go down on you while you're still angry, and do not let the devil get a foothold. So we have to deal with it immediately, not continuing to allow it to build, because over time it just stews and becomes that much more, and we have more to deal with if we don't deal with it immediately.
Yeah, tool number 6, physically sit versus stand. The brain manages anger differently, pending if we're sitting versus standing. So sitting while arguing reduces tension and misunderstandings. It calms the tone and diffuses the rage. It's interesting. We have noticed this interesting little dichotomy in our relationship. When we're mad and we're angry and we're stewing and we're pacing and we're standing up and down, or standing up and down. We're standing, we tend to get more fired up. We tend to get more angry. The words become more fiery. And when we sit down, it's almost just like it. We can almost sense and feel the diffusion of anger, the diffusion of tension, and we can begin to speak calmly with one another. Now, there's a lot of marriage counselors and advisors out there that would say, when you're in the middle of your conflict, reach over and grab your spouse's hand and hold their hand while you're talking. We haven't quite got there yet, but let me just say, for points of accountability to you all, we're working on it. And there might be a time where I feel a little fired up and hot at Chris that I might reach over and grab his hand. It might actually bring some funny humor into the conversation. I think we just have to do that.
For sure, yes. Now, absolutely.
Okay, so tool number 7, pray with one another. Stop in the middle of the conflict and pray. I would have to say that Chris is much better about this than I am. And I'm the prayer champion here at the church. What does that have to say about things? Well, let's just moment of honesty here. I will just say that we both do it. However, there are times when Chris his head is on his shoulders a little bit better than mine is. And so he'll just stop us and he'll say, okay, let's pray, because this is going to escalate way out of control and we need to pull this back in. We need to rein it in. And so let's just stop and pray. And honestly, every single time, it has 100% guarantee that every time we have stopped and prayed with one another in the middle of a conflict, we end up resolving it with so much more peace and love towards one another. Okay, tool number 8, and this is our last tool for you. It's listen to one another. Listen to what each other is not just saying, but what their body language is communicating. Listen to one another. And this can be difficult, especially when you feel pretty hot about something and you're constantly working up a good, rational, logical defense in your brain about how you're going to combat whatever excuse you feel your spouse or friend or parent or partner is making when it comes to this issue. The nail video last week is a pretty good example about that. Again, if you didn't see it, you'll want to see it. It's funny, but very real in terms of just constantly coming up with our defense. We need to think. So when necessary, we may need to also introduce an unbiased, objective mediator into our relationships. Get a counselor. Get somebody else on the outside who maybe doesn't have a relational or familial tie to you, who can be objective and who can biblically point you into the Word of God and give you good, sound biblical advice about your relationship. So we're at a place right now where we're just gonna kind of move into a time of response and allow you an opportunity to not just look at the mirror and see what you look like, but to be able to apply some things so you can walk away, as James said, and be able to do some things about what we've heard this morning. And so I'm going to ask if our worship team would go ahead and come on up and just begin to play instrumentally in the back. But we're gonna take a moment here just to respond. And our first response is this. You know, many of you may be feeling a little alienated from the architect. Maybe you're sensing that there's some sin. There's some unconfessed sin. Or maybe you're sensing that you just haven't talked to God in a while and the communication has been broken down. Or maybe you feel hurt by something and you just sense that God feels, or you sense that God has moved away from you. He's here. He's right here, and he desires to draw you close. He desires to restore and reestablish that connection with you so he can begin to communicate with you about the relationships that are important and vital in your life.
Each week we have prayer teams across our network that are diligently praying for those who ask. If you need prayer, be sure to visit our website, click the About Us tab, click Prayer Request, and send us your information. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.